Welcome to the KuppingerCole Analyst Chat. I'm your host. My name is Matthias Reinwart. I'm Senior Analyst and Lead Advisor with KuppingerCole Analysts. My guest today is again Alexey Balagansky. He is a lead analyst with KuppingerCole and he is covering, amongst other topics, the topics of cybersecurity. Hi, Alexey.
Hello, Matthias. Thanks for having me again.
Great to have you again, and this is important because we want to continue our discussion that we started in an earlier episode around the domain name system. We covered in that earlier episode the aspects of cybersecurity threats against this domain name system, and today we want to continue our discussion looking at a different aspect which is closely related but quite different. We want to look at the domain name system and its relevance regarding privacy. When we look at the domain name system, so if we look at what actually the system is, what it does, so it resolves symbolic names like www.kuppingercole.com towards a technical address. And this is done by a service that is an integral part of the internet from the very beginning, or almost from the very beginning. How can that really apply to privacy? How is this important, Alexey?
Yes, well, Matthias, just to recap quickly what we discussed in our previous episode. Yes, DNS is one of the backbones of the internet. It's also one of the earliest network services powering the internet, and obviously it was not designed with security in mind. One of the greatest challenges of modern DNS is that it's completely plain text. All requests flowing between clients and DNS servers are unencrypted, totally in the clear, running through a well-known network port, so everyone can eavesdrop, intercept, and analyze them. And this obviously opens a lot of security challenges, which we have discussed in the previous episode. But you are right, privacy is a totally different beast. First of all, because privacy is not entirely based on technology, it's based on trust. And trust is, of course, anything but technology. It's psychology, cultural issues, societal issues. So when it comes to privacy, it all boils down to the amount of inconvenience you have to, or you are willing to put up with in return to protecting your personal information, right? And many people decide that even the slightest inconvenience isn't worth it, so they are ignoring privacy issue completely. And this is where they are completely wrong.
So where do we actually see personal information when it comes to using the domain name system? I assume it is mainly the information that you provide when you want to use a service, when you want to contact a web server, a mail server, any kind of other service. Then you would indicate that you want to use that server and where you're coming from. Is this the type of information that we're looking at?
Of course, this is the most obvious privacy-related problem. So yes, every time you want to visit a website or want to connect to any kind of internet resource, you have to resolve its IP address, which means that you have to submit a query to a DNS server, and the owner of that DNS server always gets that information in the clear. So your internet provider or your employer, if you're working from an office, for example, they always know which resources you are visiting. Even as we all know that modern websites are usually completely encrypted through this TLS technology. So when we connect through a HTTPS address, the actual content of the website is encrypted, but the very fact that you have visited that website isn't. So everyone out there can know which website you are visiting, and we all know that this can lead to all kinds of problems ranging from tiny personal inconveniences when you, for example, are shopping for a present for your wife, or to much bigger challenges if you are, say, a dissident working undercover in a hostile, politically unstable country, for example. So this is the biggest challenge. What people tend to ignore, or maybe kind of forget about, is that DNS itself contains a lot of personal information. If you register a website, if you run a website, you have to provide your address, your phone number, your email address, or just your name, if you will, to register the domain. And much of that information is freely available somewhere out there in that DNS structure. And we all know that DNS, for example, isn't limited to geographical borders, so your personal information can freely flow around the world. And this is a major violation of many privacy regulations like GDPR.
So if we look at these different operations that you've mentioned, so on the one hand there is these communication between the different zones, so the upload download of types of zone information which can contain personal data in itself. And on the other hand, it's the usual user-oriented communication between client, the DNS server, and the DNS infrastructure. So what is at stake is, as a user, my personal IP address, so where I am, the communication between me and the DNS server, and everything that the DNS server can expose to the outer world. So there are, and of course, the zone transfer information. As this service is so long around, I would expect really that this transport in the clear, that this not having any kind of authentication and encryption in transit has been tackled before. Are there solutions already available that look at these challenges, starting with the endpoint, with me, and the overall infrastructure?
Well, yes and no. I mean, of course, people have been working on different approaches to solve this problem. The challenge here is backwards compatibility. I mean, DNS is such an essential part of our modern internet. You cannot just rip it and replace with something totally new. It either has to be backwards compatible and thus leaking the same data, or you have to slowly upgrade all the clients, all the services, all the devices to support some kind of a new protocol. And the problem, for example, is that some vendors, some technologies offer at least partial coverage of these challenges. For example, even the simplest VPN, the virtual private network, is always, almost always sold to customers as a privacy-enhancing technology. So it's not just an opportunity to watch American Netflix from Germany, but it's also hides the fact that you're watching Netflix, for example, from work. So the problem is that not every VPN provider has the same technological proficiency, if you will. And even if you are connected through a VPN tunnel, your DNS might still be leaking. And some really good VPN providers actually include a kill switch in their clients, which ensure that if something like that even occurs, your complete traffic will be immediately stopped, so your data isn't leaked. But even if they do solve this challenge, it all again boils down to trust. If you do not trust your ISP, why should you trust your VPN provider more?
I think, yeah, that is an important question because, as you said, there are DNS providers that do that as a commercial service. One important DNS provider is Google, and it plays an important role in the overall global DNS infrastructure. And you've mentioned that there are specialized, focused security, cybersecurity as a service providers that run DNS as a secured service where they are paid for providing this service. So deciding which provider of DNS services is the one you would trust most is really a crucial decision to make sure that you understand what could happen and what might happen, and what you can prevent by choosing one or the other option, and where in the end you are ending up with the residual risk is trusting in the provider of the service.
Well, this is again where we have to really try to delineate the border between security and privacy. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a clear dichotomy where you have to choose either privacy or security, but not both. And this, of course, relates to almost every quote-unquote enterprise-grade DNS security solution, because the very idea of an enterprise security platform in that its primary goal is to prevent sensitive data leaks or data breaches, to ensure that your corporate device isn't compromised, for example. But of course, to solve those challenges. Like that provider has to monitor everything you're doing, or at least what happens on your device on your behalf, so to say. And of course, when you are working from home, especially if you are, for example, an EU citizen and your information is protected by law, or sometimes kind of security clashes with privacy. But luckily, there are actually specifically designed privacy-enhancing technologies being developed nowadays specifically for DNS. Two of those you've probably heard about is DOT and DOH. One is DNS over TLS, which is basically the traditional DNS queries sent over a standard encrypted tunnel. The other one is DNS over HTTPS, which is again domain resolution queries converted into the standard HTTPS protocol, meaning that they work the same way as your normal site visits, and they're protected by the same technology. In that regard, nobody else can eavesdrop on your DNS traffic, so CIA or Chinese hackers or your wife, they cannot know which sites you are visiting now. But of course, the actual provider still knows that. And it's again up to you to decide, can you actually trust Google more than your wife? I wouldn't.
Yeah, I would not try to. I would try to avoid that discussion again. But basically, what we can achieve by this encryption mechanisms, either it's directly at TLS or it's HTTPS, which is TLS somewhere woven into HTTPS. But in the end, it's encryption of the traffic between me as the client, my endpoint, and the DNS server, and all these DNS servers among each other communicate also in an encrypted manner. So that part of the threat, the clear text transfer of the actual protocol data, is mitigated by this. But I think one problem that is still around would be that I have to communicate with that server, and by that I disclose my IP address. I show who I am. So this anonymity is lost. So there is still a way that my existence, my using this service would still be disclosed. Are there other mechanisms in place that can help here as well?
Of course, and there is a multitude of different mechanisms offered to mitigate that fundamental challenge. The problem is that, again, can you trust those mechanisms? For example, we all know about the Tor, the Onion Router network, which is supposedly not just encrypted, but also completely anonymized. And again, unfortunately, we know for sure that the Tor network was actually created with a strong support from American intelligence agencies. And those agencies have the technology to de-anonymize people working through that network. I guess the same can at least partially apply to any other encrypted network. For example, whether you decide for Google, Cloudflare, or any other DOH or DOT provider, well, those companies would still know who you are. And there is some kind of an additional third party required to break that connection between you and the other party. And indeed, there are some interesting developments with that regard. One is, for example, the Oblivious DOH technology, which is currently being developed by Cloudflare. And I think we discussed Cloudflare last time. It's one of the largest cloud-based security platforms. And of course, I mean, they already run millions of websites. They protect them from of service attacks and so on. And of course, it's in their interest to maintain that image, to maintain that, to offer this level of trust to their customers. And the Oblivious DOH technology is exactly that. It introduces a trusted third party. It's usually a standalone company, maybe even a non-commercial entity, which would ensure that whenever you submit an encrypted DNS query to a provider like Cloudflare, that provider would never know who you are. All those requests are running through those proxies, and the proxies claim not to tell the other party who they represent at the moment. Of course, again, it's up to you to decide whether you trust those claims or not. But well, absolute trust is impossible. I mean, that very notion of zero trust we've been discussing so much lately, in the end, it's a philosophical idea. You would never actually achieve it 100% without making some kind of a compromise. And of course, a compromise you make with regard to a trusted, probably non-commercial third party, it's probably a compromise easier to make than to decide whether you trust Google or any other company which kind of builds their own business model around knowing as much as possible about you. So yes, DNS privacy enhancing technologies are already here. They are already built into major browsers like Chrome and Firefox. Unfortunately, they're still somewhat limited. Again, if you look at the Chrome settings now, you'll probably find like 4 different options to select from. One of those would be Google themselves, then Cloudflare, and probably a couple of smaller providers. In the future, we'll hopefully see more. And of course, a large enterprise company can decide to design and host their own secure and privacy-aware DNS infrastructure, or again invest in a managed service. And then again, it all boils down to assessing your risks, understanding the compromise between privacy requirements, compliance requirements, and productivity and convenience. Nobody, even we, cannot give a 100% correct opinion on that. It's always up to you to decide.
Right. So identifying the right level of risk to accept is an important step, and that can really not taken over by anybody else than you yourself or the organization itself. But given that appropriate level of trust, so we assume we have decided if we have a trusted partner, then we would have the protection of the endpoint through the proxy. We would have encrypted traffic between the client and the actual DNS server, with an end-to-end security between the client through the proxy to the DNS server, and in the communication with the complete DNS backbone. But you said that this oblivious DNS over HTTPS, this ODOH, is an emerging standard. This is just growing. What would be then a recommendation from our side in general? You said the support still is limited in some browsers. So that means that these mechanisms are not in general use across all kinds of DNS clients, which is every internet application, every app on your smartphone. So endorse it, make sure people are using it. Would that be the right way forward?
Absolutely. And as you just rightfully mentioned, there is a fine difference between technology and access to that technology from different clients. The technology is already here. Whether you decide for DOT or DOH or a couple of other alternatives, all of those already exist. You can run the server components somewhere or let someone else run those. You can incorporate the client libraries into your software. But then again, this isn't something which is backwards compatible. You have to actively make sure that all your client devices, applications, smartphones, microservices, IoT devices, that they all support this new protocol. It will probably take another couple of years, but we are already quite far on that way. Supporting major browsers and major operating system is already a great step forward. But then again, technology alone isn't enough. Technology alone cannot address your trust issues. And to implement those oblivious DOH, for example, infrastructures, technology alone isn't enough. You have to find that trusted party. You have to probably have a contract or some kind of an agreement with that party, which covers not just technology or SLA or whatever, but also incorporates legal requirements and compliance clauses and so on. So here, again, this is not something which we can give you an ultimate answer about, but it's already here, and companies like Cloudflare are already offering at least some kind of initial implementations, pilot projects for the technology. That looks promising.
Yeah, that's a great summary. But maybe one tiny thing to add: it's we as the customers and we as the analysts, we can be in a position to also, to expose our powers when it comes to creating services, when it comes to choosing services, and make this a requirement that is a prerequisite to make sure that services that we create, especially customer-facing services that use DNS, are in a situation that they can really leverage these new types of protocols that you all mentioned. Maybe a final word for all who have not yet looked into that and who are providing these services. You might want to look at ODOH, just Google for that. Look at Oblivious DNS over HTTPS. There are specifications and there are examples around. Just make sure that you are on the more modern approach towards DNS. Alexei, thank you very much. I've learned a lot about privacy and DNS and that this still is an important factor. It's technology and it's trust. And it's really all that is around the governance and the maintenance of this trust. So again, thank you very much for being my guest today, Alexei.
Well, thank you, Matthias, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.